On December 25, 1991, it was Christmas according to Catholic tradition, but for our purposes, there's a more important event. Mikhail Gorbachev, president of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, signed a document dissolving the USSR, which had been a major player in the international economy, at least throughout the entire post-war period. Just a few days later, really, only a few days, it's February 7, 1992. In Maastricht, a small town in the Netherlands, a treaty is signed. It's called the Treaty on European Union, though everyone actually calls it something else. The Maastricht Treaty, in which 12 countries, forever immortalized in the 12 gold stars of the European Union flag, almost as a counterbalance to the USSR, which now no longer exists, agreed to create an entity that is now one of the world's largest economic powers. Obviously, within it, the countries don't have GDPs that are distributed equally. Actually, you can identify 4 major countries. After the United Kingdom left the European Union, 4 major continental countries remained. The most important country of all, Germany, produces on its own between 1/3 and 1/4 of the entire European Union's gross domestic product. So, when it wants to have a bit more influence compared to the other countries, it's got good reason for it. Following, we have France, then Italy, then Spain. These 4 countries alone represent the vast majority of the European Union's GDP, while the other countries split up the smaller remaining percentage. Over time, however, the importance of the bigger countries has changed. From 1960 up to today, the GDP of the 4 major countries in the European Union has more or less always grown, except during times of crisis, and their relative positions have stayed pretty much the same. Within this graph, though, we can see a different trend when it comes to the individual countries. Some have grown a bit more, some a bit less. This story can be shown in different ways, depending on the starting point you choose to identify the moment of growth. For example, if we start from 1960, we see a certain kind of growth trend. But if we shift our focus and start from a later year, which might be significant for the European Union's economy, the growth ranking can change. We can see this in the next slide, where we can see the relative weight of the GDP of the 4 major countries in the European Union. Germany is always in first place with the largest GDP within the Union, then France as the second largest country, followed by Italy and then Spain. While Germany is experiencing a slight decline over time, as happens with all wealthy countries, which over the years become relatively less rich because other countries tend to catch up. Spain, on the other hand, is showing a very strong and clearly increasing trend, because it has been able to take advantage of the benefits of the European Union to have a GDP, in percentage terms, increasingly higher compared to the others in the Union. We can see this in the graph, where the yellow line shows a very strong upward trend. Italy and France, on the other hand, have been relatively similar, with their share distributed fairly evenly over this entire period, and they don't show any major changes. From the point of view of someone looking at the historical series, we can also change perspective. Instead of starting from 1960, we can start from other significant dates and see how the growth of these countries has evolved, with particularly different results. If we start from 1990, the year the Maastricht Treaty and the European Union were created, we see that Spain is the country with the highest growth. It's the country that, more than the others, has been able to benefit from the Union. Unfortunately, the country with the weakest growth has been Italy. But we also see that Germany, even though it's the richest country, isn't among those with the highest growth. However, the perspective could change again if we chose a different starting date. If we start from 2008, the year of the great financial crisis, we see that the country that managed to grow the most since 2008 is Germany, which recovered extremely well from this major crisis, while Spain, which was the winner in the previous chart, has become one of the countries with the least growth that responded to the crisis, a bit like Italy. Both Italy and Spain had to wait much longer than Germany to recover the same GDP they had before the 2008 crisis. But if we change the starting date of this growth analysis again, the result can change once more. And we can see this in this chart, which starts calculating growth from the year of the Great Crisis, the COVID pandemic in 2020. From that year on, the country with the highest growth of all is Spain, once again, followed by Italy. These are the two countries that have proven most capable of recovering from the 2020 crisis. They had fallen behind during the 2008 crisis, but managed to bounce back after the 2020 crisis. We can see that, on the other hand, France and Germany have had less positive results compared to Spain and Italy. So our narrative can change a lot. It can change substantially, depending on the starting point. You see, even from a political point of view, if we want to send a message to someone, we can adopt a different perspective. Anyone analyzing economic data needs to be aware of what's behind a graph. And in particular, what calculations and motivations might have influenced the people who created the graph in question. To reproduce these same graphs, using different starting points, and getting the data from international databases, now we're heading to the lab. And here we are in the lab, where we can download the RStudio desktop software from the posit.co website, following the instructions provided there. By scrolling through the site, we can see how to install RStudio for the different operating systems, Windows, Mac, and Linux. And at the end of the installation, we should be looking at the R software set up in a window like this one. The first thing to do is open a notebook, new file, in the script format. This will contain all our commands. I've already prepared the commands for the lesson, which I can find under Files. Files contains the full list of files in the directory we're currently in. It's lesson number 2, which I can open with a click. The first thing we see is the call to a specific package.
Packages are always installed in the bottom right by going to Packages and clicking Install. This Install button opens a window. From there, we can enter the name of the package we want to download, for example, International Monetary Fund, World Economic Outlook, IMFWIO. You install this package, and once it's installed, which I've already done beforehand, you can load it into memory with this command, library IMFWIO. To send the command to the console, you press Ctrl and Enter. You can see the command echoed in the console below, and now the package is loaded. Now we can access the International Monetary Fund using the wget command to obtain the values from 1980 to 2025 for Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. You can specify different values if you want. Of course, pressing Ctrl and Enter downloads the data, which we can see at the top right here, along with a series of indicated units of measurement. To view this data, you can use View Data, press Ctrl and Enter, and it will appear. A screen appears from which we can see that all the IMF data for these countries has been downloaded, so the balance of payments, inflation, and population. But we are actually only interested in the GDP data, so we can go back to lesson number 2 and enter these commands. To create the series for Germany from the data we've downloaded, we use square brackets to indicate which data we're interested in. The data that have as their series ID the string, National Gross Domestic Product dollar, so the GDP series in dollars. This $sign allows us to select, within the data, the sections we're interested in, the subsections that matter to us. If I were to type here, for example, data, dollar, a window would pop up showing what's inside this variable. So the entity name, entity ID, series name, units. I can select what I'm interested in, like series ID, and then specify that it must be equal to something. The $sign always performs this operation within R. So here I select from the data the series identifier that contains the symbol. And also within the data, I choose the entity identifier, that is, the country, that must be equal to Germany. For the output I take the values. This comma indicates that I'll take all the other terms in the database. So I take the specified series ID and entity ID, and then all the other values. This command creates the sequence of values for Germany, then France, Italy, and Spain. We can see them here in the top right, where they've been created among the variables in our global environment. Now, to transform these series, which only contain numbers, the GDP figures, into a time series, we need another package, ZOO. We can always install it by going to Packages and Install, and then we load it with the command library zoo. To create the time series with the zoo command, we need to enter the data we want to use to create the time series and the sequence of dates. In this case, the data are arranged in columns side by side. cbind stands for column bind, so it's bound by column, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. And the dates are the sequence of values from 1980 to 2025. By pressing Ctrl and Enter, you get the sequence of GDP values. Here, you can see it in the top right. To represent it graphically, we make a plot of the GDP, all within the same screen, just on the screen, using these colors, black, red, blue, and orange. C indicates a concatenation of any values, and LWD represents the thickness of the lines involved. Line width and then pressing Enter shows the series we've created. We can add a grid in the background of the screen, and we can add a legend. The legend can be placed at the top left. In this case, there's space there, and it represents the values. Germany, France, Italy, and Spain are the strings. The colors are the same as we defined earlier, and the thickness is the same. BTY serves as the box type. I've removed the lines around the box, so there are no lines in the box. We can add the legend and that'll appear here. To represent all these values starting from value 1, I can use the following command. I'll do the same sequence of values, but instead of indicating the GDP, I'll specify a particular command that transforms the GDP in this way. I'll take the GDP data, across the columns, the second dimension of the matrix. I'll take the first value of the GDP and divide all the remaining values by it. All the values in all the columns are divided by the first value of the GDP. By giving this command, you can see that they all start from 1 and then follow on. This way, you can see that the country that grows the most is Spain. We can give a similar command, but starting everything from 2008, by defining a second GDP value with a window that takes the GDP values starting from 2008. So we define this, and we give the same command as before, but this time indicating GDP2 as the reference series. And we see that in this case, the sequence shows that Germany has performed the best since 2008.
If we select GDP3 starting from 2020 and give the same commands, we see that this time it's Spain. So, depending on how the perspectives change, the graphs can also change. We're now at the end of the lesson. See you in the next one for new and wonderful adventures.